Although the last 2 days featured some spring swings and misses on the recruiting trail for the Ducks, the summer of Dan could be fast approaching. We are now less than 4 months away until Montana State comes into Autzen Stadium for the season opener. Personally, I couldn't think of a more perfect time to unveil my very first projected Week 1 depth chart. That show out west starts right now.
This place has everything. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
That performance deserves a holy walawa.
It's a feeling you cannot explain.
This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten.
This program is staged to compete and to win championships.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West. I'm Ted LaRue. We got to kick this thing off by sending out a big thank you specifically to the YouTube audience. We just eclipsed 1,000 subscribers. It took us exactly 4 months to get there. My first show, which was really a segment, I kind of did shorter segments to start things off, was January 4th, talking about the transfer out of Gerard Kavawi-Sagapulatelli. Boy, does that seem like a long time ago. And then fast forward to May 4th, and that's when we broke the barrier. So I want to thank you, the viewers on YouTube, as this show really continues to grow. Certainly having a great time. And we want to say thank you to the team that got the University of Oregon Athletic Department their 6th Big Ten championship, that being the Oregon Duck softball team. I want to say this, all right? Oregon has had a banner year in their very first year within the Big Ten Conference. This is an Oregon athletic department. This is a university that's operating at a half share in terms of Big Ten media revenue. What an absolute steal for the Big Ten, right? With all of the athletic success, and then, being the number 1 team in the country for most of the back half of the year and winning the conference title in the sport that generates the most revenue. You got some schools down there in Southern California that are getting full revenue and are not producing certainly at the rate that the University of Oregon is. Boy, that sounds like a good deal for the Big Ten, maybe a little bit of a raw deal for the University of Oregon, but trust me, everybody is loving their spot right now. So, what do you want to talk about? Yeah, we're going to start this show on the Oregon recruiting trail in our covered wagons. We're going to stay on the Oregon recruiting trail for a majority of this show. Might get a little bit bumpy here. We got to rewind back to Sunday, and I felt good going into Sunday. That was the commitment decision for 4-star modern-day wide receiver Kayden Dixon-Wyatt. This was an Oregon versus Ohio State battle for months and months, really alternating visits, 6 of 7 visits down the stretch in like the last 8 or 9 months or something like that. KDW was either going to Eugene, Oregon or Columbus, Ohio. So it came down to this. Ohio State going back to KDW's visit over there on April 12th. Buckeyes looked like they certainly had the lead at that point. The Ducks got the last visit, and maybe they were looking to make some ground. There were some people, not only in the Oregon community, but maybe some national recruiting people that were starting to lean a little bit for Dixon-Wyatt to maybe commit to Oregon on Sunday. But as we know, he ended up committing to Ohio State. He joins Chris Henry Jr. and a couple others as wide receivers in this recruiting class right now. And here's the deal. When you get into a high-profile wide receiver recruitment with Ohio State and a guy that they really like and a guy that they really want, that is an uphill climb the whole damn way, folks. They're wide receiver U for a reason. It is very difficult. It is a tremendous challenge when you go into this type of wide receiver recruitment against Ohio State. You got to think that Dan Lanning in Oregon certainly knew that going in, and you certainly saw the end result of what happened as well. One thing that certainly popped into my mind is this is another modern-day loss for this Oregon program that had been forming at least a little bit of a pipeline down to Santa Ana, California. Of course, the decommitment of Tomahini Tupoi, he goes over to USC. Cody Green, he goes up over to Washington. And now you have KDW headed across the country over to Ohio State. Now, getting guys from modern day, it's not the be-all and the end-all. Oregon is a national recruiting program. I've said that before when kind of looking at USC's surge this spring, specifically in the state of California. Oregon has proved, like they last year, they got the top player in the state of Alabama. They they got Trey McNutt out of the state of Ohio. You know, they got all these guys from they've gotten really good players from Maryland on the East Coast. They've gotten really good players from Texas. But modern day is they consistently produce 4-star talent, 5-star talent, and you consistently have players like Chris Henry Jr. is a great example, who's from Ohio, started his high school career in Ohio, and a lot of kids transfer into modern day to have the opportunity to play in the Trinity League, to play on that type of big stage. Cody Green, being from the Seattle area, is yet another example of someone not from the Southern California area that certainly goes into there. So you would certainly like to be able to continue that pipeline, but it's not the be-all and end-all. I'll talk about more as the show progresses. Oregon is still sitting in a really good spot right now to land their third consecutive top 5 recruiting class. And now, where does Oregon go at the wide receiver position? Because this was a priority recruitment for the Ducks. This is a guy that they had been recruiting for a very long time. This is someone that they were interested in. But you can kind of understand how the chips kind of fell, how they made Junior Adams really got this recruitment going. And then when you have the wide receiver coach change and Brian Hartline and what they do over at Ohio State and the Chris Henry Jr. connection, you can maybe understand why it went the way of the Buckeyes in the end. But now as we look forward at the wide receiver position for Oregon, look, they're still in a really, really good spot. This is like the furthest thing from a gut punch. This is very different from maybe like the Cody Green flip up to Washington, because not only did Oregon recruit very well with 2 really good guys last year, the number 1 wide receiver, of course, and DeCorian Moore and Cooper Perry, 2 guys that, of course, DeCorian and then Cooper as well, who are a lot of people are certainly talking about in Eugene through spring right now. But then you fast forward to 2026, Gatlin Bear, a former 5-star from the state of Idaho, he's going to be coming off of his Mormon mission. So, okay, when you talk about enrollees in 2025 and you talk an enrollee in 2026, that's back-to-back 5 stars, folks. That's good. That's very good. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then you kind of look at, in terms of high school recruitments and what's going to kind of go, what direction is Oregon kind of go from here? They're sitting in a really good spot right now. Messiah Hampton is a guy that Ross Douglas, we talked about maybe the challenge with Ross Douglas coming in and trying to retain maybe the groundwork that was laid with Junior Adams. Sometimes that change can be difficult in recruitment, but Ross Douglas was already laying the groundwork for Messiah Hampton in New York when he was the wide receivers coach over at Syracuse. Like, that's one that I feel really good about. We've learned throughout this entire recruiting cycle, nothing is a guarantee. A lot of things are very far from guarantees, but I feel really good right now about Messiah Hampton. And if you look at where in the 4 major recruiting services, Messiah, he really leaped forward big time in the last On 300, but he's ranked at least in the ballpark of where KDW is. And then Jalen Lott is another guy out of the state of Texas that they're very, very high on. Like, Lott is rated higher than Dixon-Wyatt according to On3 and ESPN. And only ESPN has Lott outside of the top 100. Rivals has him at number 49, 24/7 has him at 60, and On3 has him sitting there at 91. So if you kind of bring it all back to home plate a little bit, what could these last 2 classes look like? We talked about the 2 guys that were coming in that are currently true freshmen on campus in Eugene. You have a 5-star in Gatlin Bear, and then you could throw in Messiah Hampton, maybe Jalen Lott as well. But at the very least, if you get 2 5-stars in 25 and 26 and 2 4-stars, that's a really good haul. 4 blue chip wide receivers in a 2-year span for a program that continues to take steps up in the type and the profile of player that they're getting at this position. This is a group that is going to be just fine despite falling short on Kayden Dixon-Wyatt. We go from a recruiting loss on Sunday to, well, you guessed it, a recruiting loss on Monday as well. You know, I think Oregon fans certainly might have been sipping their margaritas on Monday night with their chips and salsa and the burritos and their tacos and their Cinco de Mayo dinner, but it wasn't maybe a celebratory margarita. Maybe a margarita to drown down some of the pain a little bit of another close loss this spring in terms of gaining a commitment on the recruiting trail. And, you know, when I look at this whole Jared Curtis situation, you go back to when he originally decommitted and you look at some of the quotes and you look at some of the interviews and the media appearances and the reports ever since then. To me, it really seemed like this was all about just making sure that Georgia was the right decision for him. Now, that's kind of the way I view it. Some other folks may view it as, well, he opened up his recruitment to maybe get, knowing full well that he was going to end up in Athens, Georgia, but he just kind of wanted to open up the negotiating window maybe a little bit to draw a couple more bucks out of Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs down there. However you look at it, Jared Curtis is certainly not a duck. I think the closest Oregon got was in late March, right? In the middle of March, he took a visit out to Oregon. He took a visit out to Georgia. And then like a week later, a couple of weeks later, there was some buzz kind of going around. Oh, this is the moment. It could be a couple of days from now. It could be a week from now. Jared Curtis is going to commit to Oregon at that moment in time. But Georgia got back into the mix. And then when that kind of got pushed down the road a little bit, and then when the commitment date was like 6 weeks down the road to the beginning of May, that really pushed things back into the favor of the Georgia Bulldogs, certainly in my humble opinion right now. Now, where does Oregon go from here at the quarterback position? They are fantastic for the next 2 years, no matter what happens. Even if Dante Moore absolutely balls out, wins the Heisman Trophy, and goes on to the NFL, you've got a great quarterback in Austin Novosad sitting there as well. If Dante Moore plays 2 seasons for the Ducks and maybe Austin transfers out after that, you still have 2 years of Dante Moore. I hold the opinion that Dante is probably going to have like a Bo Nix type of trajectory. Bo Nix threw for 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, over 3,500 yards his first season. If Dante is in that type of stratosphere, and then you look at what he could be in year 2, yeah, they're going to be just fine, I think, no matter what, in these 2 years at the quarterback position. Of course, you got Achilles Smith Jr., who was a 4-star recruit last year coming out of the San Diego, California area. I think he needs multiple years of development, but where is Achilles when we get 2 years down the road and we're approaching that 3rd year for him on campus? Okay, we'll see. I thought he certainly flashed some good things over there in the spring game, but the point that I'm trying to circle around and trying to make is this was a recruitment that Oregon certainly really wanted, and they poured a lot of resources into it, but Oregon is sitting in a really good situation over the next 2 years, and I think they certainly still have some options. The thing that the Ducks have proven is that they can grab guys out of the transfer portal and they can turn them into Heisman finalists. That's the standard. That's the standard right now for the Oregon Ducks. So even if you have to go to that option, you'd love to have a high school recruit at quarterback, and you'd love to be able to develop them over the years and be able to really produce that. But they've proven that the transfer portal can certainly work just fine. Now, I think a lot of people are looking like, what happens after this 2-year period? First thing that I want to do is throw out a scenario. It's been in my mind a little bit. It's been mentioned a couple of times over on the Scoop Duck message boards, but I want to throw it out there and maybe speak it into existence a little bit because personally, I don't think it's the most far-fetched thing in the world. You know, when we're talking about these quarterback strikeouts, we're talking the first one, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the show, my very first time here on TSOW was talking about Gerant Kavawe-Sagapulitele, who signed in last year's class, but then was a transfer out to Cal in January. Right now, JWS is sitting in a Cal quarterback room with an incoming transfer, a veteran in Devin Brown coming over from Ohio State. It's certainly no guarantee. I'm sure JKS would love the guarantee to be able to start. That was certainly a big factor in his recruitment. He wanted to go out there and play right away. But Devin Brown is coming into Cal right now, and he has 2 years of eligibility remaining. Like, if JWS is sitting out there saying, look, if I'm going to sit and learn, why don't I sit and learn at a place like Oregon instead of sitting and learning in a place like Cal? I think Dante Moore is going to prove this year that was a very beneficial move for him. So it would not surprise me to see Gerant Kavawe-Sagapulitele pull a Dante Moore to follow Dante Moore. I think in order for that situation to happen, you would have to see Austin Novosad transfer out of the program following this season where he would have 2 years of eligibility remaining. Like, after this season, it's going to be very interesting what Austin is going to do because he said with Kenyon Barner and Jonathan Stewart on the Ducks of a Feather podcast that says, hey, I love what's going on at Oregon right now. I love Will Stein. I love the system, and the system has proven that you play just 1 year, that can be enough to get you to the NFL. So it's going to be very interesting for Austin to see how long he's going to hang around. But an Austin departure could open up the door for a Gerant Kavawe-Sagapulitele return and then to be able to learn for that 1 year behind Dante Moore. And then maybe you get the guy who set all of those passing records high school-wise in the state of Hawaii to continue the Hawaii quarterback tradition over at Oregon. It is far from the most far-fetched idea certainly out there. Now the question. Now that we know Oregon came up on the short end of the stick with Kayden Dixon-Wyatt. Oregon, after a hot and heavy recruitment with Jared Curtis, where they fall up short on that one, what's next? Well, chronologically, what's next is the commitment date 1 week from today of Jackson Cantwell. I would be borderline shocked at this point if Jackson Cantwell commits to any school other than the Georgia Bulldogs. I don't know, it was like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, something like, maybe it was only like a week and a half ago, something like that. Very recently, Steve Wiltfong RPM prediction had Jackson Cantwell at Oregon. And then I saw a Twitter interaction of Jackson quoting the tweet of Jared saying, hey, congratulations with a handshake emoji. Jackson is going to be on campus on May 10th before making his decision on May 13th. Duck fans, no, just get that out of your head. I do not think Jackson Cantwell is going to be a Duck. So now we're sitting here in this spring commitment season. Strike one, strike two, strike three, but the Ducks certainly aren't out. I said this in my prediction when I predicted where Curtis would go and where Kayden Dixon-Wyatt would go. Oregon could go 0 for 3 during this stretch, and they can still be in a great position to have their third consecutive top 5 class right now. Brandon Arrington, who's coming off of an Oregon visit very recently. I feel pretty good about him. That's going to be a difficult recruitment, but he's one of the top corners in this class there in the state of California. Davon Benjamin is a guy that Oregon is one of the leaders certainly in his recruitment. That's probably going to be an Oregon and USC one. That's a 4-star corner. You look at Richard Wesley, who's a guy out of Sierra Canyon in California, where he recently has been on 3 RPM predicted to land at Oregon. And he recently said in an interview that Oregon is recruiting him harder than anybody else out there right now? Jyra Edwards out there in the state of Maryland, right? The defensive back, Maryland connection, Ife Obadegwu, as well as Brandon Finney, of course, has maybe created a little bit of a pipeline out there. Like, you're looking at a five-star guy and a handful of like top 50 players. All right? This is still can be a really good class, and you've got Tony Cumberland, and you've got Tredarian Ball, who shut down his recruitment. You have Kendre Harrison, who shut down his recruitment. Like, there's still food on the table here, folks. Okay, maybe you got a big turkey leg that's been eaten already, and maybe you got half of the stuffing that's been eaten already, but there's a pretty good spread still left out there on the table right now. Now, where do things go from here? Before I get into that, I want to say this, okay? I led off this entire show talking about the spring swings and misses. These were recruitments that Oregon spent a lot of resources on, maybe spent a lot of money on, that they certainly were hoping to be able to get, but make no mistake about it, the spring is not where Oregon traditionally wins. It's the summer. Now Oregon, I think, shifts in to that summer mode, that official visit mode, because even though we saw some swings and misses this spring, I got a feeling, just like pretty much every other year that Dan Lanning has been on campus here at Oregon, we're about to see the summer of Dan with some of those recruitments that we were just talking about, right? We know Brandon Arrington he set his commitment date for the day after Independence Day. And July, after some of these official visits, is a very popular time to have some of these commitment dates. You look at last year, there was a bunch during this time. There was a bunch during the summer. And I got a feeling it could be the summer of Dan, certainly in 2025. Now, let's talk about where Oregon shifts their focus as we head into a potential summer of Dan. It's got to be Emmanuel Iheanacho, and it's got to be Ryder Lyons. Let's start with the big offensive tackle out there on the East Coast in the state of Maryland. This is like this right now, safely assuming that Jackson Cantwell does indeed commit to Georgia. This is a must get, okay? Because I think it seems like one of the priorities with the early commitment of Cody Green, and now we know what happened there, and in going after someone like Jackson Cantwell and Emmanuel Iheanacho, it certainly seems that this staff is heavily invested in getting some big-time offensive tackle recruits. And Nacho is the one that now they need to, Oregon, after this last visit, he proclaimed Oregon as his leader, and the Ducks need to make sure it stays that way. Coach Terry, Coach Lanning, Coach Stein, and the staff need to make sure that this thing is locked and loaded. Whenever he sets his commitment date, they need to make sure that Oregon is that team, because if Oregon is not that team, and you miss out on Cody Green, Jackson Cantwell, and Emmanuel Iheanacho, that's really going to sting. That's really going to hurt. Now the fun part. Quarterback. Missing out on Jared Curtis. Where do the Ducks go now? Ryder Lyons. They're going to push a ton of money and resources into Emmanuel Iheanacho, and they certainly should. They're maybe going to push as much and many resources into Ryder Lyons. Boy, following that Jared Curtis decommitment, there was about a 10 or a 15-minute period where Oregon fans were kind of embracing what eventually was the inevitable of kind of what we knew was going to happen. And then came the news, the Fong bomb from not only Steve Wiltfong, not only friend of the show, owner and publisher of Scoop Duck, Justin Hopkins, but also Pete Nakos of National On 3. All three of them, almost immediately following Jared Curtis's decision, logged their prediction for Ryder Lyons to eventually end up at Oregon. Now, Ryder has taken a lot more visits to USC than he really has to any other school out there. He's got one official visit right now, and it is to USC, I think like in the third week of June. I'd be very curious now where this timeline goes with Ryder. What we see and what we hear over like the next week or so, maybe like going into the weekend, I think is really going to tell us where exactly this recruitment is going. I decided to kind of refresh my brain a little bit and pop on the Ryder Lyons tape. And I'm like, yeah, I know that these are both two of the most high-profile quarterbacks in this class, but let me just remind myself of the type of quarterback that Ryder Lyons is. And I go out there and I turn on the tape and I see him kind of moving around. He has like similar mobility, although it is kind of different in how both quarterbacks kind of move around. But he has the mobility, he has the boogie, he has the ability to get outside and create plays with his legs. And yeah, he's got a pretty damn good arm there out of the Sacramento area there in Folsom, California. And I'm like, yeah, this will work. This will work. It was such a swing of emotions after the Curtis decision. And then you're like, man, this stinks. Because you kind of knew what was kind of coming up with Jackson Cantwell, as I said before. But then this kind of really jolted some optimism, I think, into the Oregon fan base at this time. Like, you kind of look at both of these guys. It was very difficult to kind of look at this thing and think, like, man, for Oregon to strike out on both of these guys, and then you throw in the whole Jonas Williams thing and how that played out, it would have been surprising, I think, considering, I think, the push that Oregon was making to land a top quarterback, to not come out with the top quarterback. I said earlier in this segment that he was originally RPM'd over to USC. Now I think the pitch for Will Stein in Oregon has to be, you're our future. USC, although they're in different enrolling classes, like Jonas Williams is at 26, Ryder Lyons will be at 27, but right now, Oregon needs to say, post Dante Moore, Austin Novosad, whatever, however that works out. And I know I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth right now, having mentioned the Duran Cavawe Sagapulitelli theory before, but bear with me. Bear with me here certainly for just a minute. They need to go to Ryder and they say, you're our future. You're our future. We think we got 2 years of a year of Dante, a year Austin, 2 years of Dante, a transfer, plug and play for 1 year when you first come on campus, and then that second year that you're on campus, it's the Ryder Lyons show. I think that's got to be the quarterback plan, certainly going forward for the Oregon Ducks. Folks, I know it may not seem like the best right now, and there's segments of this Duck fan base that are really down in the dumps because they see rivals out there. They see USC getting wins. They see Washington getting wins. They see other conference teams like Ohio State getting wins. But trust me, the summer of Dan is approaching. We are 116 days away from the Montana State Bobcats coming into Eugene, coming into Autzen Stadium to face off against the Oregon Ducks in the season opener of the 2025 season. And you know what? I've had about a week or so of the spring game to kind of marinate, watched it live. I was also able to kind of rewatch it, and I'm able to kind of rewind on a specific play. I'm like, all right, I'm going to watch the offensive line here, going to watch the wide receiver here, going to watch the corner here, going to watch the linebacker here. So I think I got a pretty good idea of the skill sets of some of these players and who's maybe going to play a little bit more, maybe who's not going to play a little bit. Hey, the spring game is all we got to go off of, folks, right now, but I'm putting it out there. I'm putting out, over 100 days until boot meets ball. I'm putting out my projected week 1 depth chart. You gotta love college football coverage, certainly, don't you? Let's start on the offensive side of the football with the signal caller, the quarterback position. Now, I love both of these guys in the quarterback battle, both Dante Moore and Austin Novosad right now. But this was one of the easier starter backups to really chart right now. I just think Dante Moore, and I think you saw a little bit of in the spring game where Dante Moore can just do a little bit more than Austin Novosad can. Like, Austin made some good throws in this game, but I think Dante made some throws that get you out of your seat a little bit. That throw on the first drive where he kind of just touched it over a linebacker for like 20 to 25 yards to Kenyon Sadiq. The throw on the sideline to Jurian Dickey with a defender right on him was just right there, right in the breadbasket. It gets you excited. It was kind of a flash of what we certainly could see. I think the big thing for Dante, based on kind of what we've seen at UCLA and kind of the small sample size, I think is going to be decision making. If he makes good decisions, if he takes care of the football, and I think some of that goes on the play calling, because Will Stein, one thing that this offense has certainly emphasized, taking care of the football. Don't waste possessions, even if it results in being efficient and taking short passes. Oregon has fantastic playmakers to catch and run, keep the sticks moving, and put points on the board. Okay, so I think that's going to be a big point of emphasis with Dante. We know we want to see him really unleash those big plays down the field, but we're going to see some more efficiency that we've seen from Oregon's offense in the past as well. I think Austin Novosad is one of the best backup quarterbacks in college football. I have a lot of confidence that if Dante Moore were not able to go, if he's injured, whatever, Austin can step in and he can win as many games as Dante could at the quarterback position. I certainly don't think there is a big-time drop-off, right? There's not a major drop-off. There might not even be a minor drop-off with Austin at quarterback. So I love what we have from a starter and backup perspective at the quarterback position. Let's head over to running back. Was kind of rewatching some of these spring press conferences, and I stopped on Rashad Samples. And he's saying, man, this running back room is so dynamic. It's so deep. I need to call the NCAA to see if we can play with two footballs to get all of these guys the football. And he talked about how each one of these running backs, the skill sets kind of complements the other. I think the skill set that certainly stands out above the rest is Mekhi Hughes. I think Mekhi Hughes is certainly going to be the starting running back. Transfer out of Tulane, had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons over there for the Green Wave. You went out and got a talent like that for a reason, and that's to be RB1 to replace Jordan James. Now, when I look at Mekhi Hughes, when I look at Noah Whittington, I see very much point A to point B, straight ahead type of runners. Now, they can certainly bounce it to the outside. They can certainly do their thing. But they're gonna I think run in a pretty straight line like that, and that's what I love. I love that power mentality. We saw it last year from Noah Whittington. Of course, everybody's going to replay that Ducks versus them clip when he just absolutely truck sticks somebody over there at the goal line. I remember watching Mekhi Hughes' press conference this spring. I'm like, dude, the guy looks like a freaking defensive end. Looks like a middle linebacker. Like, this guy is absolutely shredded in there. He's going to be really tough to tackle. I think the thing when you turn on the film from Mekhi Hughes is when he bursts through that hole, it's really hard for one guy to bring him down. So he's not only going to maybe even sometimes seek out contact, but he's going to be able, it's going to take a few guys to certainly bring him down. So I think he's going to be getting into the secondary certainly a good amount. You cannot I know there's a lot of excitement with some of these young guys in the running back room, but you just can't glance over Noah Whittington. The production that he's been able to do, I've said it before, I think he's a perfect 1B type of back. He had some really explosive runs. Now, shorter explosive runs, but still some really good runs, I think, in the spring game. And then you got to talk about Dink Riggs. I put Mekhi Hughes as my starter, and then Noah Whittington or Dink Riggs as my backup right now. I think Dink kind of provides that shiftiness. He provides that pop and that speed, I think, a little bit at the running back position as well. I think Dink, I know he didn't maybe have a spring game quite like Jaden Lamar. More on him here in just a minute, but I think he's going to, based on what we're hearing from the coaches and what we're hearing from some of these behind-the-scenes reports, like he's going to be, I think, in that conversation. I think if maybe Oregon wants a little bit more shiftiness, like I said, on the field, or they want a little bit more speed on the field, they're going to look to Dink Riggs. I really wanted to maybe try to put Jaden Lamar. I think Jaden Lamar, including myself, I thought he could be a guy that could possibly transfer out during the spring. But I think maybe we're shortchanging Jaden Lamar a little bit. Kind of referencing back that Rashad Samples press conference, He talked about just the breakaway speed, the end line speed of somebody like Jayden. We saw it last year in the game against Oregon State where he had a touchdown run. I think that was on like a screen pass or something. And then we saw it in the spring game, the touchdown of that first drive. So if you're looking to get maybe more speed on the field, I think we're going with Jayden Limar. I just couldn't find the right combination to put him right now in my 2 deep. And then you look at somebody like Jay Harris. Now, Jay Harris is somebody, and this is, once again, I hate to go back to the well, but, Samples gave some really good sound bites earlier this spring that maybe Jay Harris is that power back. Maybe he's that goal line type of back where you need a couple of really tough yards and you put in 22 like we saw it during the spring game. This was after the fumble. He came in at the goal line and he just dragged guys with him across the goal line. So I think there's so many skill sets in this running back room. I think they're all going to be utilized at different times, and I'm excited to see the creativity. But, man, I love this running back room. It's one of the things I think that I'm most excited about on this Oregon team. Let's move to tight end. I talked about how quarterback was a pretty easy position to kind of handicap as far as a starter and a backup is concerned. I mean, this was easy as well. Kenyon Sadiq, of course, is the starter, and I've got Jamari Johnson, of course, as the lone backup right now. Now, here's the thing. Here's the relationship that I want to talk about when I mention both of these guys. I've talked about it ad nauseum, how big of a fan of Kenyon Sadiq that I am. We saw a little bit of it in the spring game. We even saw a little bit of it last year. This is not a guy that's consistently going to be on the end line next to the offensive tackle. Going to be in a 3-point stance, blocking, going out for routes, whatever. Typical tight end stuff. They're going to do so many things with him. He's such a unicorn. They're going to put him in the slot. They might put him out wide, which I think gives more opportunities to somebody like a Jamari Johnson at tight end. Jamari Johnson is a big body. Don't sleep on him because everybody and their mother and me are talking about Kenyon Sadiq right now and how great he is. And he's one of the top 5 tight ends in America. He could win the Mackey Award. Oh, but he's also a tremendous blocker as well. Like, everybody raves about the skill set. But I could just see just throwing out a hypothetical situation. You've got Evan Stewart split out wide on one side. You've got Decorian Moore on the other side. You've got Kenyon Sadiq lining up in the slot next to one of those receivers. And then you've got Jamari Johnson in there as well. Maybe a goal line situation where they can use his size to his advantage. And now when everybody's looking at all these other great targets, you've maybe got Jamari like one-on-one against a linebacker or something, or one-on-one against a smaller safety where you can post him up and really use his size to his advantage. Like, I think you could see Jamari involved maybe a little bit more than we anticipated at the tight end position. Going beyond the starter and the backup and the 2-deep, Roger Sayalapaga is one guy that's coming off of an injury, and I think his health is very important to the depth right now, because after these two, there's not a ton of depth. I know they brought in Vander Ploeg. Vander Ploeg, I think, has the potential to maybe be a bigger wide receiver like a Kyler Casper. He doesn't have that typical, 240-pound, 250-pound frame that you might see in a tight end, but he certainly has the height. So I'm very curious to see which direction he could go in. I could very well see him being a bigger possession wide receiver, but if he does bulk up during his time over at Oregon, I could certainly see him being a really good tight end as well in the future. Now let's move over to the other pass catchers, that being the wide receivers. Okay, so I feel good about 2 of these wide receivers. I've got Evan Stewart starting at the X, and I've actually got Decorian Moore starting inside at the F position. It also wouldn't surprise me if those 2 were flip-flop. The thing about all of these wide receivers is they can play in so many different spots. Like I was just mentioning Kenyon Sadiq playing in the slot. Like there's going to be a lot of shifting, a lot of different formational stuff that I think we're going to use. But I think Evan and Decorian, one's going to be outside, one's going to be inside. I could see both of those guys being actually outside at any moment in time as well. So this is kind of the way I have it right now. This is kind of the way that I thought kind of fit best within the grand scheme of things. And then the Z position, like that's that wide receiver 3. And this is just an absolute coin flip. A 4-sided coin, 5-sided. I don't know how many sides there are on this coin, but there's a lot of options here. I'm like, okay, if I'm setting betting odds, who do I think has the best position to be in this spot? And that's where I put Malik Benson or Jeremiah McClellan as my starter at the Z position. I kind of look around at some of the other guys. I know you've got the more experienced players in Gary Bryant Jr. or Justice Lowe, but I think they work a little bit better coming out of the slot. I actually have Bryant and Lowe. That's my or for the backup at the F position. So I've got DeCorian Moore as my starter at the F, and then the backups as Gary Bryant Jr. and Justice Lowe. So I thought they worked a little bit better off the inside of the formation. I think that's where their experience is at that particular position. I didn't think Kyler Casper or Jerion Dickey right now could. I think Dickey has a better chance than Casper to maybe get into that role, but I just wasn't quite ready to put them into that point. So what do you have left over? You have Malik Benson transferring over from Florida State, and you have Jeremiah McClellan that got onto the field a little bit last year. So that's my or for my Z position, Malik Benson or Jeremiah McClellan. I have Kyler Casper as my backup at the Z. I have Jerion Dickey as my backup at the X. Two a little bit bigger bodies that certainly I think fit on the outside. You know, it wouldn't surprise me. There's been a little bit of momentum kind of going on for Jerion Dickey right now. Wouldn't surprise me to see Dickey maybe work his way into the starter at the wide receiver Z. Like, I love to see guys that are highly regarded out of high school and we know have the potential, realize that potential. I want to see Jerion Dickey realize that potential. I'm rooting for Jerion Dickey. And I mentioned this maybe a few weeks ago. It's like the reset in the wide receiver room with Ross Douglas coming in, I think could possibly favor a guy like Dickey to be able to maybe reinvent his career and take multiple steps up the ladder. So that's kind of how I have it laid out right now. But man, you could see so many different combinations across the football field. Let's go to the offensive line. Just one returning starter in this group up front. I'm going to start on the left side, move my way to the right side. Let's go left tackle. For my starter, Isaiah World. And this is a guy that some people are pegging as a top 15 overall draft pick. This is an easy pick, certainly, right there. I got some youth as my backups over there at left tackle. I've got Fox Crater or Zaire Addison. Zaire Addison, the true freshman, coming from the Tampa, Florida area as well. I saw both of those guys in the spring game. They had their ups and downs as far as reps, but I think they're young. This is a place, I think this is an opportunity for this year for both of them to learn and continue to develop. One, I think, trend that you're going to see as I go around to the offensive line, I like the starting group. Once you get beyond the starting group, there's maybe some question marks when it comes to the depth. Left guard, it's Emmanuel Pranon transferring over from USC. I love the left side of this line going into center. Looking back at some of these spring press conferences, Alik Terry was raving about the transfers and just how huge they are. Just the mass of some of these guys. Emmanuel Pranon, he is a big boy. He was projected to be, I think, third or fourth round pick. If he would have came out of the NFL last year at USC, I think him transferring in, he's looking to certainly work his way up to be a first round potential, maybe a second round potential type of player. I've got Kawika Rogers right now as his backup. He's a redshirt junior. He's been in the program for a little bit. I think he can kind of move around and play a couple different positions. I think has he played a tackle and guard as well? So I think he can be versatile in some of these roles as well. At center, Iapane Lalaolu, also known as Pancho. I was listening to the Ducks of the Feather podcast with Kenyon Barner and Evan Stewart, and Kenyon was kind of challenging Evan to maybe be a little bit more of a vocal leader, and he was around the team for a few weeks, and he says, on offense, it's very clear that Pancho is the vocal leader of this team. You love to see that out of the captain, certainly of your offensive line. I've got Charlie Pickard as the backup. Remember, Charlie Pickard was in there at center the first couple of games of the season when maybe things weren't going their way in there, but I've got him on that second team in the middle of the offensive line. Let's move over to right guard, and I'm using my or for the starter at right guard. Matthew Bedford or Dave Iuli to start on the right side of Pancho over there. I could see both of these guys. When Marcus Harper went down last year, a little bit later in the season, I think, for the Ducks, Dave Iuli stepped up And there's some people out there that's saying, yeah, he played better than Marcus Harper when he was in that role. I thought he played some pretty good football on Oregon's offensive line last year. Matthew Bedford is a guy that transferred in from Indiana before last season. Injury really held him out. He's a really big body in there. I just don't quite know which way this one is going to go. I don't think you can really say a definitive starter right now at right guard. I'm going to throw Doug Utu, the 4-star true freshman, in there at right guard. I think that he's got a bright future in the interior of this offensive line for the Ducks. So I'm going to slot him in there and going to give him that opportunity as well. Over to right tackle, starter Alex Harkey coming over from Texas State. I've got Janoris Wilson as my backup. I know there's maybe whispers that say, hey, maybe Janoris could challenge Harkey for that right tackle spot. I firmly believe that Harkey is going to be the starting right tackle. And I've heard other people kind of say this, and then I watched the spring game back a little bit, and it really confirmed that. Harkey, I think, and sometimes this can be a positive and negative, both at a tackle position. I think Harkey's a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker right now. Hey, you certainly want to see him be a good pass blocker, but I really saw him mow some people over watching that spring game back a little bit. So a lot of confidence in the run game. We'll see how much better he gets as the summer goes on, the fall goes on, as we get closer to the first game of the season. So that is my offense depth chart. Now we're going to move over to the defensive side of the ball. Now, here's a disclaimer. I know there's kind of different positions, and it's can be a very hybrid type of defense. I have 3 linemen, an edge rusher, like a jack linebacker, 2 inside linebackers, the star, and the 4 other defensive backs. I know the strong side linebacker is in there, and I know that's another option, but for now, these are the 11 guys that I'm going with. All right, let's talk about the defensive line. Let's start first at the defensive end. This was the Jordan Birch spot last year. It's the Mateo Uiagalelei spot this year. He led the Big Ten in sacks at the end of the regular season last year. I think he's slated to be one of the most feared pass rushers maybe in all of college football, and there's no question, right, that he's starting at the defensive end spot as well. You move inside of the nose tackle, that's where I have Amari Washington starting. I think both of those guys can be all conference players. It was very simple to kind of put those guys in starting roles on this depth chart. And there was this other position, the defensive tackle position. I think there were some options, and I think with the rotation, you're going to see different guys in different places, but I'm going to go Bear Alexander. I think Bear is kind of one of those transfers where, Oregon doesn't take a ton of transfers, and when they do, I think they kind of put their faith in them a little bit, and I think Bear is one of those guys. If these 3 are playing, especially Bear, if he's playing at that level that we know that he can play at, this defensive line is going to be lethal. Now let's kind of get into my second teamers. My second team defensive end, I'm looking at Elijah Rushing or Ashton Porter. Initially, I just had Rushing, but then I kind of thought about it a little bit, and I'm like, Ashton Porter played pretty well during the spring game. He's been in this program for 3 years now. He's a redshirt sophomore. I certainly think that he's going to be in the rotation. Elijah Rushing had some really good reps as well, a very highly recruited player coming out of high school. So, yeah, feel really good about those backup defensive ends over there. Now, you look at nose tackle. That's a position where you want some girth. That's a position where you want some beef. And boy, do we have some beef. I have Tion Gray or Terrence Green as my backup nose tackles right now. Tion Gray, you're looking at 6'6", 330. Terrence Green, you're looking at 6'5", 330 pounds. Those are some big human beings in the middle. I think both of those guys are going to be in the rotation consistently. Both, specifically Tion Gray, I thought he had some really good reps in the spring game where he was able to shed some blocks and do some really good things as well. I could see at times maybe one or maybe both of these guys playing alongside Amari Washington in the defensive tackle rotation as well. That certainly wouldn't surprise me. But when I look at the defensive tackle spot, I think that's maybe a spot where maybe a guy's going to be a little bit more agile, maybe not be as beefy as it maybe is at the nose tackle. So like I mentioned before, I had Bear. And then I got Aiden Breland. Aiden Breland, I think, is someone that got a lot better at the end of last season during his freshman year. And I think him and Elijah Rushing were tremendously highly recruited players coming out of high school. And I think now the second year in this system is really their year to kind of get into the rotation a little bit more as well. So that's what my defensive line room looks like. Now, coming out of off the edge in that jack linebacker position, that can be a little bit of a hybrid position. My starter is Tatum Tuioti. Of course, he did really well last season. I know Mateo and really Jordan Birch got a lot of the flowers when it comes to, you know, the sacks and the tackles for loss, but Tatum certainly put up some good production as well. And I think having Mateo on one side and having Tatum on the other side is going to create favorable matchups, I believe, for both of these guys. My backup, Blake Purchase. Now, if I'm putting in a strong side linebacker position, which I know, you sub the star or the nickel out, or you move some things around, you take this jack linebacker, you kind of like, it's an Oregon defense that moves around and does a lot of different things. But if you have that strong side linebacker, like I said before, I'm not having that in this specific depth chart. I think Blake Purchase would probably be the leader in the clubhouse for that position. But man, I'm watching that spring game back. Blake was in the backfield every frickin' time. He was consistently in there creating havoc. Rewatching this spring game, he was probably the best defensive player on the field. Now, there were some other really good defensive players as well, but he was certainly in that group at the top. He's going to be highly involved in this defense. You better believe that. Let's go to the inside linebacker position, and at the MAC and the money. I think these are fairly simple picks. Of course, Bryce Betcher, he's the green dot. He's the captain of this defense. He's the heart and soul, really, of this defense in the middle. That's a very easy pick at the MAC. I go to the money, Devin Jackson. Devin Jackson certainly saw some time last season when there were injuries and some shuffling going on at these positions. So I think that's a pretty safe bet for the starters. But we heard Dan Lanning say after the spring game, we're not going into the portal. And I heard that, and now I rewatched the spring game. I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. I understand why. Jerry Mixon. I thought, I talked about how Blake Purchase probably was one of the best defenders. I think maybe in that ballpark or that group, I thought Jerry Mixon was really well. Like, he could be, if he kind of develops into what he started to show in the spring game, that's another example of what Brian Michalowski is doing in terms of the development at the inside linebacker position. I've got Jerry Mixon as the backup of the MAC linebacker to Bryce Betcher right now. I'm going to use my or for the backup at the money position. I've got Braden Platt or Dylan Williams. I thought Platt played a really good game as well. He was a 4-star linebacker when he came out of high school. I think there's an expectation that he's going to develop and certainly get on the field a lot more. Dylan Williams was a guy that I thought both in against the run, and I thought he did well in pass coverage during the spring game as well. I could not keep him off of this depth chart. We move on to the secondary. Let's talk about corner. I'm going to start first at the boundary corner. There are two spots that I feel like, okay, I think they're going to be pretty solidified, that I feel pretty close to like 90 to 100% that they're going to be starters week one. It's Dylan Thieneman, who we'll get to in just a minute at safety, and Ife Obadegwu at corner is certainly the other one. That play where he put his shoulder down on the football in the spring game, got me so excited, but they never threw to his side of the field during that game. I think he's going to be fantastic, and he's just a redshirt freshman over there on that side. So I've got him starting, and then I'm going to use my or for the starter for the field corner. I've got Jaleel Florence or Theron Johnson. I think both of these guys have some experience. I know there's a lot of youth in the secondary, but I'm going with experience at the other side. I think at one of these positions, at a lot of these positions, you're going to want some experience in kind of your starting group. And that's what I'm getting out off of here. Jaleel Florence, I think if he wasn't injured last season, he would have been certainly a big part in the rotation. I know they had Jabbar Muhammad. I know they had Nico Reed, but I certainly think he would have played a role last season. Theron Johnson is probably one of the best man-to-man cover guys that this team has. I think you saw glimpses of that during the spring game as well, and he's got a great man coverage grade from his time at Northwestern, where he was an all Big Ten corner as well. My backup at the field corner, I've got Sione Lalea. He saw a little bit of time last season. This was a guy that was 24/7 Sports had him as the number one junior college player in the country. I would certainly like to see him get a little bit more go this year. And I've said it before, and I am going to prove it with this depth chart. Good luck keeping Naeem Offord and Trey McNutt off the field. It starts here with Naeem Offord. I've got him as my backup at the boundary corner in this specific room. I feel good. Now that I kind of see it laid out, I can certainly be very happy with what that corner room is looking like. Let's move to the star position, also known as the nickel. Quarterback, tight end, and I think nickel were positions that I'm like, oh yeah, I feel very solidified in one starter, very solidified in the backup. Starter is Dalen Austin. Now I know he's got that trial pending that's been pushed back more towards the fall camp and maybe even the start of the season. So maybe there's a little bit of or maybe a little bit unsure of what his status could be. But if he is indeed eligible, I think Dalen Austin is the starting star. And I think his backup is Jaden Kennedy, the transfer who comes over from Ole Miss. Got to cite your sources. Got to shout out the QB11 Show podcast. Great show. I'm sure you're already a listener of it. It's probably the best Oregon show out there. We've had Doug on the program here before, but they were talking on that show with Hifliday, and and it kind of made all the sense in the world where Jaden Kennedy is a little bit of a smaller guy, but he could really be that dime back. When they bring in that sixth defensive back in a passing situation, he's the guy at a smaller stature and quicker stature. I think that really plays well into that package. We're going to finish our depth chart off. Sorry, specialists. We're not going to cover the specialists. Maybe sometime down the road. Let's talk about safety. My field safety, let's start first with that. My starter, I've got Kingston Lopa. I rewatched the film, and I wasn't thrilled with the performance of Peyton Woodyard. I think like what we saw from Kingston and his performance in the Big Ten championship game, just his sheer size back there at 6'5", some crazy length. We heard Dan Lanning in the spring say, he says, yeah, I think Kingston is going to have an unbelievable year for us. So that gives me confidence to think Kingston Lopa. I've got him as the field safety over there. Boundary safety, no doubt. It's Dylan Thieneman. I mean, what else can you say? Right, he's, back-to-back seasons of over 100 tackles. I think he's going to certainly come in here and be one of the leaders on this defense. My backup, let's start the backup with the boundary safety. I thought Aaron Flowers played a really good spring game. I thought he was a very physical player, made some big hits, and I thought made some good plays in this game. So I've got him as the backup at my boundary safety position. I'm going to use the or. I'm going to go Peyton Woodyard or Trey McNutt as my backup at the field safety. Good luck keeping Trey McNutt off the field. Now, these true freshmen are really, really good. Even though I maybe didn't see the best of things from Peyton Woodyard, like he was a guy that played in close to every game last season in one form or another. So getting on the field that much early in your Oregon career, I think that speaks to something. So that's why I've certainly got him at this point on the depth chart right now. I'm excited to see how many of these I get right, how many of these I get wrong when this thing kicks off in week number 1. Another great edition of that show out west is in the books. Let the countdown begin to week 1, and let the countdown to the Summer of Dan also commence. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next edition of that show out west.